Time for a Rise Shine. We are so excited that you're with us today, and I am so excited that we're here again and having conversation with each other. I just love this time. As my husband always says, Wednesday's the best day of the week.
Day of the week.
And you know what? Arise, shine. Let his glory be seen upon you, because, wow, it's his desire.
My friend.
Blooper.
Yeah, blooper.
Blooper.
Well, she, actually what Kathy is doing is she's going to be putting in the comment section right now, she's going to be putting in a link for the different giftings that we've been talking about. They're going to be just a list, like an overview of each gifting for you to really be able to look at and kind of process. There's some really good information on that link. And so Kathy will be putting that in the comment section for you to go in and check out. And as you've been learning and processing with us your different gifting, you'll be able to go deeper into it, which I really encourage you, or we really encourage you to do, because again, the conversations that we've been having have been all about the motivational gifts from the Father, and they are from the Father. We were born with these gifts that God has given us, that we are able to effectively live out the destiny, plans, and purposes He's given us. And so that's why we're all have that motivational gift that we're more motivated out of. It was given to us by Him. We're all gifted differently so that we will function together as one body. And so it is really imperative, I think, and as we've been talking about it, so imperative to really learn and talk with the Lord about your gifting and understand your gifting, understanding you and understanding others, because wow, it will give you that freedom and grace to live out what He's put in you with excitement and anticipation of how He's going to move in you and through you through that gifting in the different aspects of what you're involved with and your families and just in general. And so we're just excited. So far we have Dave here again.
I'm a guest.
Yeah, we've been teasing him that he might be here with us for a few more weeks, but
I'm a guest.
Well, we just very much appreciate Dave and his ability to just the teachings that he has done on the motivational gifts, and it's just been powerful and helpful, enlightening, and so I've just been so thrilled that he was willing to be a part of this. And we're all being blessed by the teaching and even the stuff that Barb has brought too. It's just all so exciting how God has created us, and it's in the Word. You know, everything that we're bringing to you is a truth of the Word, and the motivational gifts are in the Word, and they're given to us by the Father, so they are something for us to study, to learn, and to grow in. And so again, so excited that you're here. Please hit share and like to share it with others. And I really, 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 every week I'd say this, but I really encourage you to make some comments. We'd love to hear what you're feeling or thinking about what you've been listening to. Maybe some of you could share what your giftings are and how you've learned from this. The comments really help us. And also any prayer needs, we certainly would like to be able to pray with you and for you. So share those as well. And again, we invite you into our conversation today, because we're going to continue on talking about the motivational gifts. I'm Rebecca Ballard.
I'm Dave Ballard.
I'm Kathy Hollanday.
I'm Mary Dollinger.
I'm Barb Milroy.
Again, welcome. And I just wanted to do a quick overview, unless you were going to, on the ones we've done so far. You can do it.
Go ahead. No,
You're good.
Tell what we've done so far.
Yeah, what have we done so far?
Which ones have we done so far?
Pressure's on.
Which ones have we done so far?
We were prepared.
We started with profit,
We did do
the
that.
profit gifting, our motive, and then it was
Serving.
servant, then teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and then exhorter, and then now today we're going to talk about the giver and the ruler, or some people will say the leader.
Yep.
And then next week we're going to be talking about mercy gifting, and there are other things we're going to bring into next week. So you don't want to miss any week, because it's all so exciting and we learn so much. That's what we love about our conversation, is that we're learning as much as you're learning.
That's right.
Sorry.
No worries. Well, as we talked before, we were talking about the importance of all this. Why are we doing this? I mean, why is this a big deal? And 1 Corinthians 12:1, when Paul wrote about the giftings, he said, "Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you ignorant."
Yes.
And there are over 20 references in the New Testament about spiritual gifts. So obviously there's some thought process. This must be important. And that word ignorant, if you look that up in the Greek, it means to not know through the lack of information or the lack of intelligence. So he's saying, I would not have you, I don't want you to be unlearned about this, ignorant about it, so it must be very important. At the end of the chapter, he starts out, that's the very first verse of the chapter. The last verse of the chapter says, to keep on desiring the better gifts. Or in the King James, he says, to earnestly covet. Which
Wow.
sounds like a bad word when you talk about giving it.
Yeah, don't covet, but you should covet.
But it says earnestly covet, and if we look at that again in the Greek, it says to have warm feelings of, but the last part of it, it says to be envious or jealous or zealous for.
Oh, I like that.
So he's saying that we should be zealous for the gifts. So this must be something that would be important. And I think the last half of that is that part about defining the more excellent way. You know, again, the gifts don't affect our salvation. They don't save us. They don't make us more holy Christians to anything that. It's basically they help us to find a more excellent and more fulfilling Christian walk. If we understand it more, we're able to understand others better and relate the facts of Christianity to others in more powerful and impacting ways.
Well, would you say there's more grace in the things that God is, the things that we do in our lives? You know, whether it be raise a family or working or all the different aspects of our life are affected by how we embrace this motivational gift that God's given us.
Right. That's why they're there to help us be more effective in our walks, to be more powerful in our walks with others, and to just enhance our lives as believers.
And I just want to reiterate something that was astounding to me. Most people don't know that we are born with the manifestation gifts that God wants us to have.
Motivational gifts.
Motivational gifts.
Right.
Redemptive motivational gifts. Before we were ever born, God put them into us because that's what He wanted us to live out of. So they're in our soul,
Yeah.
not in our spirit.
Yes.
And so let me just back a little bit. Again, we define motivation, talking about motivational gifts today. That motivate is to stimulate forward or towards action. Okay, so that's how motivate is defined. So they are not natural abilities, but they're spiritual in nature. They're these inner tendencies that give to us an ability to perform some tasks better than others do them, because God enhances us. Okay, so they're not natural, but they're supernaturally supported abilities that God gave to us.
That operate through our soul.
Right. And each one of us has one that I believe is dominant. We're born with one dominant, and then the other 6 of them are help to shape how we are with the dominant one.
Yes.
And I think over time, the order of the other 6 can shift some. We've talked about this, where you were an exhorter, and as you did Pampered Chef, this leadership thing started to rise up, and you started to exhibit more of those qualities and those tendencies as she was involved in that.
Because I needed to.
But I think those were part. But the one is always the dominant one in our lives, and so it just shapes how we view things and how we react in situations.
And it helps us in ministry where we fit in.
Right.
What's the right fit? What's comfortable instead of striving to be like someone you admire or somebody you like. You find out who you are and how you fit into the whole.
Right. Good.
And I even think it affects how we, in our job situation,
Yes.
you know, how we, you know, some people just hate their job. Well, maybe it's because they're really not in what motivates them. So it's such hard work to be doing something that's so not a part of who you are. So once you really can understand this about yourself, you may find yourself looking for that job that you will thrive in with that motivation.
And that's so true, because I was a nurse. I'm a mercy, and that's what it fit right in without me even understanding.
Yes. Yeah.
It's funny.
Well, we're going to jump into the giver today, and then we'll talk about the leader, however you want to call it.
Ruler.
Ruler, there's other names for it. We're talking about the giver. We're taking the gifts out of Romans. Romans chapter 12 are these motivational gifts. They're all listed in there. And how Romans 12:6-8 says this. It says we have different gifts based on the grace that was given to us. The verse 6 and 8 says, and if you're a giver, to give generously. And so that's going to be the word that's going to define the giver all the way through the gifting, is that word generosity. And it's a big part of who they are. 2 Corinthians 9:6-7 says this. It says, for God loves a cheerful giver. And I found that word cheerful in the Greek says to be hilarious. So it says that they love a hilarious giver. And it's that to me it demonstrates the level of joy that they should have when they're giving and when they want to give.
And the givers I know are actually very much like that.
They
do very much enjoy giving.
So the giver is, we talked about the analogy of the body, and Paul uses that the analogy. The giver are the arms of the body, and that they give and they receive. Okay.
So isn't that interesting how the servant is the hands, but the giver is the arms?
Wow.
But they're not like all one thing. You have
they're
hands
using it
and
to
then
reach
you have
out.
arms.
Okay.
That's cool.
So sometimes when people look at what we call spiritual gifts, it's easy to look at the prophet, the exhorter, mercy, and understand that they're very spiritual gifts. And the servant and the giver sometimes are overlooked. Like it doesn't seem like it's a spiritual thing, because how spiritual is it to give money? But it's a very spiritual gift, and they have a spiritual need to give. It's just something that they are driven to. They're motivated by the Spirit. They're driven by the Spirit in their relationship with Jesus. And I believe that part of that is because givers are grateful for the blessings that they've received from Jesus, and they want to pass that on to others. They want them to experience this blessing and this generosity of God. When givers give themselves. They package themselves into everything they give. If they give you something, it's not just a gift. It's a part of them that they're giving. They give in the forms of money, possessions, time, effort, but mostly it's in the form of money. I mean, usually they're the financial contributors to the church. I have found that alongside of servers, that givers are usually the quickest to volunteer. When there's a need that's there, they'll be one of the first ones to step up and say, I will come and physically help in that project. I have determined that the givers are the most spontaneous of all the gifts.
Really?
Yeah. That they are free and impulsive people at times, look for adventure and fun in life. When I talk about the giftings, we have 7 children, and so we have different giftings interspersed throughout our kids. Our firstborn, Andrew, is a classic,
he's a classic
giver. I mean, he is, all these things that we talk about, he fits these to a T. Of our kids, he's usually pretty spontaneous and likes adventure. And when he was younger, we ran sled dogs, and he was running sled dog races, and he just likes to be out, and he likes to ride a bike now, so he's riding these long 100-mile bike ride things, and he's very spontaneous about those things. And so I think that they give a lot to life, and they also expect to receive a lot from life. So it's just, we talk about the seed time harvest. Is that you reap what you sow. They give a lot and they expect a lot, because they understand the concept of reaping and sowing, because it gets exhibited in their lives that when they give money, they get a lot back. They're usually very blessed in that way. Okay, so I find that givers usually are very good personalities. They're very friendly. They make friends pretty easily with people.
Yeah, I noticed on this list that we put in the comment section, the link, they said that they can connect with anybody. They're very friendly, that they can connect. It's not just about their peers. Right. It's about any groups of people.
They do. I have a couple of stories, and I don't want to bore people with too many, but we went to a conference in Kansas City once, down at a One Thing conference, and I took a bunch of teens down there, and we ended up in this auditorium that seats 12,000 people, and we were kind of late, and so we ended up having to climb up towards the top to sit, and we end up at the top, and we all sit down. Andrew's on the end of the row of all these teens I have, and he sits down next to this kid, And I looked at all the kids and I says, watch this. By the time we're done here, he'll have that kid's name, number, phone number, email, address, everything. Well, 2 days later, we're still at the conference, and we're in a different part of the auditorium, and Andrew gets up and walks away, and then he comes back and says, well, what were you doing? He says, oh, I saw that kid I sat next to the first night, and I wanted to get his contact information. 'Cause I just, they're very friendly, and they're very loyal people, and that's because that they enjoy sharing themselves with other people, and they just like spending time with people. They're usually pretty relational when they're around people, and they look for lifelong friends.
It says natural networkers.
They're natural networkers.
Oh,
yeah.
is that true?
Yeah, and when they commit themselves to somebody, they're friends forever, and that's Andrew has lifelong friends.
And even going all the way back to his childhood, when we would go on the sled dog races, and he would go around and he would network with all of the other racers, so that when it came time, there were times where he was given a dog by someone, or he did a job for somebody because he had networked just by introducing himself and, being friendly in that. So, yeah, he's very much a natural in that.
And that's very true. They're very good at, like, on committees and group ministries and volunteering organizations, because they're good at networking those things. That's a good point. They're usually very people-oriented people, very centered around people. But there's one difference between the giver and mercy. Mercy people are very dependent upon relationships. They're very people-oriented people. We're going to talk about that next week with someone that's at the table here, who's got to hug everybody.
There you go.
How givers are not dependent upon their relationships to people. They can be alone and not get stressed out. Whereas a mercy person gets very stressed out when mercy people don't do well with COVID isolation.
No, that's true.
We'll talk about that next week. Or as Bill Johnson said, I found during COVID I was addicted to people.
There you go.
They can be content to be alone, but they love to be around people generally.
This list too talked about how the other gifts all have a counterpart, except the giver kind of stands alone. So
And they're
the
probably-
mercy and the prophet kind of meld well together. The exhorter teacher meld well. The ruler servant, but the giver is just kind of the lone ranger.
And
Doesn't
maybe-
need other people. And
Maybe that's because they're kind of connectors. Partially, like you said, networking. Maybe out of the things like they're like down the thumb because they can touch all the other digits, whereas they can't.
right. But they're just very independent. So
Yeah.
they don't necessarily
And that
need
is Andrew. He
people.
is pretty independent.
So they're not necessarily connectors for their need.
Right.
They're good at connecting others.
Right.
That's interesting. And that's Andrew.
Okay. So the giver's basic motivation of this is to conserve and share resources in order to meet other people's needs. It's very important to them that they meet other people's needs. They're motivated to see that others have the resources that they need to meet their ministry needs. Okay? They take very great delight in discovering the needs that other people overlook, and then meet those needs. They're always very worried that what they give is of high quality, and they want their gifts to matter rather than just be a gift. Also, I found that givers really like to stay out of the limelight and give secretly, and they're very reluctant to have other people know how much they gave and those kind of things. I had a guy that used to come to the church here, and he had kind of a combination of leader. I'm going to talk about him in the next one too, because he's a leader, but he had a lot of giving in him. And one day he showed up at my house and kind of sheepishly handed me a check for the church. He says, I don't want anybody else to know this, and it was a 5-digit check. It was a very generous donation to the church, and he said, I don't want anybody to know I did this. So he was very reluctant about that. But he took a lot of delight in giving, and he gave a lot of funds to us. Givers have the great ability to make wise purchases and good investments. They're very good with money. Usually what they buy is of high quality. They don't like to buy cheap stuff. They like to buy the best of stuff. They always have good, quality equipment and cars and things like that, because they understand what investments are about. I think out of the giftings, this is maybe a personal observation. I think that the givers are the kindest of the gifts. They just seem like they're very kind to people. I mean, mercies are very empathetic and polite, but they're not judgmental. They're just very kind to people, and I think it's because they want them to see the best in them, and they want them to be the best. and they give themselves. So again, to reiterate, they enjoy sharing themselves with others. That's their joy. That's where they get to sharing of themselves with others. They look for ways to do that. Okay, where I'm going here. Okay, so saving resources brings a lot of pleasure to givers.
Really?
They regard saving as a key that opens up the door to other resources. We always kind of laugh that when we go to Andrew and Joy's house, is that, and not this isn't necessarily a big thing, but in this day and age it seems that way, they wash all their Ziploc bags. You know, they have soup or something or whatever, they dump it out and they wash it because they're saving it so they don't have to buy more of them.
So they can give the money.
So they can have more money to give away. They're just very practical. I grew up with that, so for me it's not that big. But then again, my parents went through the Great Depression, so they saved everything. But Andrew does that, and I don't know where he got that from, but God gave him that, I guess. So every move that a giver makes, particularly in the areas of finance, is very calculated on the long game. You're looking ahead to the long game. What is down the road? How is this going to be growth factor in investments and things to that? We'll talk a bit more about that. They're able to accumulate savings. They often have a good savings. Andrew usually has a savings account of money,
Very good at
and
that.
he's very good with money. They like to pay for cash for everything. We taught our kids when they were little. I tell people we were Dave Ramsey before Dave Ramsey was Dave Ramsey.
Yes.
Because we used to actually cash my checks and put it into envelopes. And I had a budget written out for every month, what week, what would go in what envelope. I borrowed Andrew's car here a couple of years ago and got in his car and opened up the thing between the seats, and here was a cash envelope labeled gas. And then there was like, $200 worth of cash. It was a fair amount of money, but he had his cash envelope, and so he paid cash for his. They like to pay cash because they don't like debt. They feel it's not a wise investment to do that. So they're very calculated about that. Again, one of the things about givers that I've also discovered is that they have an excellent understanding of accountability and authority, which is probably why they work well in other people, because they understand their place. Again, it's because they understand that the accountability of giving and receiving is not reaping and sowing. You know, if I'm respectful, treat you with respect, I can get respect back. But they're very good about that. They know who's in charge, and they're not worried about being in charge. Okay.
One thing I've noticed about givers, and it showed up on this list, was that they're very private people. You know, when he talked about he didn't want anybody to know he was giving, and I think that lends itself. They're just very private people. They don't, they're very kind and they're very loving to people, and they want relationships, but that yet.
Again, they could be alone, and
Yep.
they don't have to be bound by that. Givers evaluate spiritual growth in other people by how they use their resources.
Oh,
The
interesting.
story about the talents, is a big deal to them. The talents were multiplied, so that was obviously a person who was very spiritual. Accountability, if you're willing to be held accountable, and your dependability. Givers like people that are dependable, and they will make relationships built upon that. Okay. Again, givers often like to get personally involved in the lives of the people that they give and that they support. When they give, they don't just give to a cause. They want to give to something that benefits people. So
Yes.
they don't care about giving to a budget to build a building,
Yep.
but they want to give to a cause that's going to benefit the people. That's why Feed My Starving Children, the Franklin Graham organization, because they're giving to people to benefit people. It's an investment. They're investing into those people that will invest into generations, and we talked about that when we were planning. But they want to see generational things happen with their money again, because it's
Yeah,
an
that-
investment.
That is a really good thing about that. They're generational.
Yeah, we talked about how Abraham was a giver and how, he was very concerned about where his money was going to go since he had no children. And he asked the Lord, who's going to be my heir? I think it'll have to be my servant. So he had this they do have a generational outlook, and not all the gifts do. Contrast that with Hezekiah, who back in 2 Kings. He had, he was wealthy and had a palace. He was the king, and he said, "There's nothing among my treasures that I did not show them." He's talking about showing all the men who came to see their wealth. And Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord. And some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." "The word of the Lord you have spoken is good," Hezekiah replied. For he thought, "Will there not be peace and security in my lifetime?" So he was really only concerned about himself and his prosperity and peace, whereas the giver does not think that way at all. They definitely have a generational outlook at who's coming behind me, who's coming after me, and how do I prepare the way for them.
Yep. And
That's good.
I said a lot of them are that way too. They want to see others benefit and blessed, and future generations blessed.
What about giving too? I know, I do see myself in this more and more. There's for a few areas I don't, but but I know that my son was giving some money away to some cause, and it just really bothered me because I wanted to go to feed people, or I wanted to go to teach people, more instead of just a general kind of cause. And so that's real interesting there, the way you said that it has to benefit people and not just yourself, but somebody else. That's interesting.
It's kind of that teach a person to fish and they'll be fed for life, but just give them money for the moment, or a fish for the moment. They'll, it's that whole idea. Yeah, they'll be hungry. So, you should mention as an example, Andrew's bike ride.
Yeah, like for example, Andrew, again, he likes to ride a bicycle. And so he's involved with this group of men that they call themselves Team 515 because they get up at 5:15 a.m. and ride bikes at 5:15 in the morning, which is way too early for me. But he's involved in a 100-mile bike ride, and it was a fundraiser bike ride to give to his organizations about teaching men to be better fathers. And so he was very passionate
talk about
this.
Generational.
Yes.
It was to support fathers to be fathers to their kids, and that is generational.
I mean, like for example, let's say if the church is asking for extra funds, I said we need more money to put carpet in the church. I mean, a giver would probably give it, but if you said, but today we're actually going to gather money because we're going to go and we're going to buy turkeys and we're going to go down to the veterans home and they'll be the first ones with a checkout, because it's like that's to people. They would rather do that than to the carpet, because that's a budget thing. You know what I mean? So they're motivated by that in a much greater way. So, a couple more things just for this is givers will pray earnestly about what they're supposed to give, and then they take great joy if what the answer they come up with is the exact need. Like if they come up to somebody and said, "I was praying for you and God said I should give you this," and they hand them a check for $747, and the person said, "Oh, I just got a repair bill on my car. It was $747. How did you know that?" To them, then that proves that they're hearing from God.
Yeah.
And it validates their relationship and their experience, because they may not hear the voice. It may not be this relational thing that other giftings, but to them, I heard God's voice because I knew exactly what the amount was supposed to be. Again, I want to kind of reiterate back to this. They like to invest themselves emotionally. We always used to chuckle because in as family we would draw names. We have so many people, we can't all buy gifts for everybody. So everybody draws a name and we'd swap gifts out.
The kids would.
Yeah. And so the kids, every one of them wanted to have Andrew draw their name because they knew maybe they weren't going to get like this great gift, but it was going to be a very personal gift. It would be, a quality coffee mug with something about them and this and that, and a package of stuff. It was always, you knew you had to put a lot of thought into it. Whereas some of our other kids, you'd be lucky if you got a gift card from the gas station on the way home, because there was, I got to buy something for so and so. So the difference is always the quality and the investment into the gift. Again, givers make pretty good business owners, businessmen, presidents of corporations, because they understand the CFOs. They're very good CFOs. They make good treasurers for churches. Again, they're very good with money and good with their giftings. The examples in the New Testament are Levi, Zacchaeus, Mary of Bethany, and the poor widow who gave everything she had at the end. And Mary broke open the jar of oil, and they said that was a year's worth of wages, they felt. So that was a pretty expensive thing. The things that they potentially do wrong, sometimes they can give sparingly to their own families because they're so busy giving to everybody else that, their kids don't always have some of the greatest things sometimes. Sometimes they could sway into the areas of feeling like they have some control because they've given so much money to this organization that they have a say in it. And not often, but sometimes people do that. And sometimes just not hearing God's prompting and either not giving or giving too much or something. But because they're so concerned about getting it done that they'll step into it because they want to see this project done. Well, let's just give some money to it rather than waiting and say, does God want me to give this to this thing? That can be
Almost that not relying on faith, but relying on the ability that you were given to make this money. Now I'm going to give this money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we were talking about how that they are kind of risk averse sometimes because that requires more faith, and they tend to have more faith in their own ability to make money, where God wants them to rely on Him for the supernatural.
Yes.
So that can be a difference between, I think, maybe the more carnal and the more
And sometimes
mature.
it's easier to step into something and just write out a check than it is to get personally involved.
Mm-hmm.
So givers need to know that they need to be involved with people's lives rather than just writing out a check and leaving.
Or wait on God. Sometimes that, when you see a need or you feel like I should give into this, go ask the Lord, is this something you're asking of me to do? And what would you have me give? Sometimes I think, maybe the impatience of waiting on God to give when and how.
That's good. One of the interesting things too is looking at the 7 letters to Revelation. It was to the church of Sardis, which is actually the most negative of all the passages because they can tend to be so independent and kind of standing and doing the right things, but for all the wrong reasons. They know what's right and they do right, but they're lacking in the right motivation sometimes, and that can be their big downfall.
Right.
But
But that's avoidable by their connection with the Lord.
or they
In
can
all of our
say,
giftings,
right,
our
yeah.
weaknesses may come out, when we're not fully, operating in that connection with the Lord and operating in it as He, so
Right.
there is we're all kind of working through the weaknesses in our
Yep.
giftings as we're maturing and growing in the strengths of our giftings.
Yeah, I was just saying how too because they're so generous, like you said, they can tend to want to take control, or they can tend to think, well, I'm so generous and I give so much that God's going to overlook the other lacking areas of my life.
Oh, interesting.
My lack of spirituality or my lack of, I don't think they like to get as involved, like we said, in spiritual warfare. All somebody else do this spiritual stuff.
Right. That's their tendency to not be involved in the spiritual things because it's easier to just give.
And they're, wired to do it, but we're all called to engage in,
What did you say
What
their
was it?
birthright was?
We gotta find it now. Let's see.
I know you mentioned it for the other ones. I was just curious what that was for this one.
Let's see. Where are we? We had trouble finding that one.
Yeah, I think we did.
Was it to do with? It had to do with generational
Oh, yes, that's what it was.
type things,
Yeah.
but generational blessing into the family line.
Okay, and that's
Maybe.
their birthright.
Mhm.
Yeah, because we talked about that, the giving of from the families telling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one.
So it is a generational mindset.
Yes.
A passing down mindset that is needed in the body. So let's move into leader.
Moving to the leader. Romans 12 again says if we have the gift of leading, to lead enthusiastically. So a leader that leads well is enthusiastic in what they're called to do. In the Greek, The leader is defined as one who stands in front of others. And they are the head of the body. Not that it makes them any better that they're in the headship, but just an analogy of a body. So the first question I always kind of roll through is, what's the difference between a leader and a manager? Because there's a difference between the two.
Do you have the answer?
I do have the answer.
We're all waiting.
The manager is a person who directs or manages an organization, a person who controls the business or the affairs, a person who has a talent for managing efficiently. Okay? A leader is defined as one who rules, guides, or inspires others.
So
So-
a manager manages, the leader leads with inspiration.
The leader is goal or a mission-oriented person. They're very interested in the mission and the goal. I see the difference between a leader and a manager. The managers usually don't have any personal investment into it.
Oh, that's a
Typically,
huge
they've
difference.
been hired to control it,
Yep.
whereas the leader is there because they have vision for it, and they're involved. They're invested into the process. So leaders are all about the jobs around them, typically the things that need to be taken care of, and the biggest thing is that leaders give priority to the goal or job and set other things aside. They can set personal time and personal spaces aside to work thoroughly through the job. I referenced my friend Mike. My friend Mike was a very good leader. He was the CEO of Jamar and then API, which is a $6 billion construction corporation. And he was very good at, he came and talked one time at a men's retreat, and one of his biggest points was, he says, I think Christians should be the first ones to leave and the last ones to leave at the job site.
First ones to arrive.
First one to arrive and the last ones to leave, excuse me.
That's wonderful. Then.
Because that priority is, this is my job, and I'm setting this aside, and he's very focused about his job. And that. They're very strong-willed people, typically. Once they make up their mind, it's very difficult to convince them otherwise. You can't change their mind much. They're usually very competitive people, especially at games and things like that. They're highly visionary people, and they can see the broad perspective of everything. That's where the difference between the leader and the servant is. A servant can't necessarily see all the pictures, everything that needs to be done. They can see, well, this needs to be done, so let's go do that. Where the leader says, well, wait a minute, before we go do that, what are the other components that have to be put into place to make this thing work first? So they're able to motivate everybody else to see that picture.
Well, and a leader knows how to implement a vision and then delegates to how that's going to work out. Where a servant doesn't want to be you don't want to lead it.
Right.
Right? But you know how to implement.
Leaders understand honor and respect authority, like I talked about the givers. A good leader will come in and want to know how much authority they have when they walk in, and they want to respect the limits. My favorite pastor that I know, his name is Mike Smith. He pastors Redeeming Love Church down in the cities. I had him speak, and he walked in, and the first thing he said to me, he says, "This is your house. How long do you want me to speak? What would you like me to speak on? Do you have any ideas about that or
Wow.
anything?" He said, do you want to minister at the end? And he came and said, "I'm not here to this is your place. And I understand you're the one in authority, and I want to be respectful of that authority. How would you like me to minister tonight?" So that's what a good leader does. They respect that. And they tend to value harmony and efficiency between people. They're very concerned about the cogwheel and how it all works together. Because again, it's about getting this job done. They can see all the relevant issues of a project. They can see the decisions that need to be made, the people that they need to approach, finances that need to be required, things that need to be followed out. They can find those resources very well. I had a process here when we built this building from the ground up, and on the Friday that we were going to open, I had a special speaker flying in from Tennessee, and he was in the air in the airplane, and the plumbing inspector came in and says, "Well, that drinking fountain out there is 6 inches too low, and the sinks in the bathroom aren't hooked up yet, and I don't want any volunteers hooking those up, but you got to have those in before I'll sign off." He was the last inspector to sign off. And
This is
so
the day that we had
yeah.
the person fly
So,
here to speak.
I got on the phone and called Mike and said, "Mike, here's my struggle." And within 30 minutes, 3 Jamar vans pulled up, and a bunch of plumbers jumped out, and they got out the sawzalls, and they cut everything, dropped that, got that sink in place, and man, they bam, 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 but they had that thing done. I called up the plumbing inspector at about 3:30 in the afternoon or something like that, before City Hall closed. And he said, "Did you get that sink moved?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you get all the other ones hooked up?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Who did the work?" I said, "Well, I called Mike McParland from Jamar, and he came over and took care of it." And he said, "Well, if Mike did it, it's cool. I signed off on it. You can come get your permit." He didn't even come and take a look at it.
Oh,
He just knew that if Mike was in charge of
wow.
it, that it was going to be done right.
Wow.
And he knew that, he didn't have to deal with that. So at 4:15 minutes before they closed, I went and got the occupancy permit so that we could have our evening service. Otherwise, we weren't going to have it at that point. But I said he knew exactly what he needed. He knew where to find the resources. He got everybody there. They had all the tools they needed and everything, exactly what needed to be
That's
done.
amazing.
So leaders are the one who help others develop themselves in ministries. Their thing is to develop others in their ministry. Paul wrote to Titus telling him that leaders are the maintenance of ministries. In other words, they deal with relationships of time and space and are able to maintain these things together. They can juggle time and space well. They know how to, an idea, well, this is going to probably take about this long. And they're typically pretty good at fitting those things together and putting those together. Leaders need to have clearly defined goals when you talk to a leader. If you're coming them into a project and you say, well, we don't really know what we're looking for, that's going to frustrate them. But if you can say, we want to build this ministry here, we want to be able to feed 100 people, we're looking to do this twice a week, this is the kind of food we want to do, they can start, the gears are turning as you're talking, and they're already starting to lay the things down that need to be taken care of. And good leaders are leaders that don't work alone, but work with others and find others to work in cooperation with them. Poor leaders are the ones who just take it all on and do it themselves and never have other people help. And that is a weakness of this gifting.
One thing I've also seen, I saw in Mike, and I've seen in you, but oftentimes a leader, we hear the term a servant leader. Oftentimes a powerful leader who inspires is one that's willing to do the very tasks he's asking someone else to do.
Yeah,
So
that's
Clean
true.
the toilets.
sometimes you'll see the leader working right alongside of those he's asking to do the work.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in really powerful leaders,
Yep.
influential leaders.
Yeah, the best leaders are the servant type of leaders. And leaders make good entrepreneurs, again, business owners to a degree. Builders, they're usually very good in the building trade because they can comprehend and see all the structures that need to be done. Missionaries, church planters. I think a lot of church leaders are church planters because they can see, again, all the components that need to be put together. And I've discovered that there's 2 styles of leaders. You find the leaders that are the extrovert leader, the one that's out front who wants to set the vision, who's usually the face of the company, the spokesman who's always out there. But there's also an introvert leader who leads from behind that you don't often see what's going on, but they're doing it. My nephew, Jonathan, owns a company. They own several Airbnbs, and he owns a marketing company, and he's in a partnership. And John is the extrovert. He's the face of the company. He does all the commercials and all the TV interviews, but he's got a partner who's the introvert who does all the computer stuff and the books and all that kind of stuff. And they work together, but they're both leaders and they work well together. And they have a multi-million-dollar corporation because they work well in that way. They're both leaders. They just have different ways that they do it. So, again, as I reiterate, leaders have the ability to see the long term. They see things down the road, the goal that needs to be accomplished, and then the path and the journey that they have to take to get there. And they break everything down into small, achievable groupings to get to that. That's what they're able to do, pull those together, not just one big, I don't know what to do. They know this has to be done, then this has to be done, this has to be done, this has to be done. And then they find the people to fit into those roles and get those completed. Okay.
One of the things I grabbed on this was that leaders are also good at, when you said grabbing different people, that they actually can, they don't just work with ones that they think are super efficient or what. They're willing to work with different people, even if they have to teach them.
But they're more concerned with loyalty than confidence.
Loyalty is an
Loyalty's the number one.
extremely big deal
Yes.
to leaders. They want, if they find someone who's loyal to them, again, I'll throw back to Mike. Mike got a young guy named Craig Feldman who was played hockey for Army, and Craig came in as an associate, and Mike just grabbed a hold of him and just mentored him. And when Mike left, Craig took over his role as the president of Jamar because he was loyal. He saw the loyalty in Craig and the devotion of Craig to the company, and so Mike invested a lot of time in him, and that's what a good leader does. One thing I find interesting about leaders is that typically leaders will stand on the sideline and not get involved until they're asked.
Really?
I've discovered that, like my analogy is that in soccer game, for example, they'll stand on the sideline and let the coach just, let the kids run around like cats or whatever like that. And if the coach says, hey, you want to come in and help me with this? They'll boom, they'll step in, and then they'll say, hey, you should do this, and then we could do this, and they get it all organized. But they won't thrust themselves on things because, again, they understand authority, and they don't want people doing that to them, and so they don't want to do that to someone else.
I think in one of the things I listened to, they actually said, I think it was Arthur Burke, he said you'll very rarely find a ruler on a church board because they don't volunteer.
Right.
If you don't ask them to help and they don't feel needed or wanted, they won't volunteer. They often need to be asked.
And that was in that list too, that they don't typically volunteer. That's interesting.
Very.
Leaders usually have very thick skin. They can tolerate people's, complaints, irritations. They handle pressure well under situations. They don't get flustered real easily. Kind of last couple of things, they're usually able to discern character very well in people, especially when they're making hiring situations, like things like that. And they can get the impossible done. You get a real leader and give him all the resources you need, he can get stuff done that nobody else can do, like any other gifting. And that's their big strength.
I have to give you a little kudos because I think there's some leader in you, whether it's your top one or not, we're not sure, but when you built this building, you went down, you took care of getting the license and the permits, you got the person to do the blueprint. The maps workers, when they came up, they were just like, okay, what do we do? And you just boom, boom, boom. And I mean, this was a huge project to build this building. But you saw all that needed to be done, and you made sure that it got done. And I love how you saw the people that needed, that you needed, and just said, here you go. And it was amazing to watch how you were able to really utilize all the people and utilize your strengths and get this building built.
Well, thank you.
And you saw too, even you saw in Mike's leadership and how you could rely on him to help with the building and all that you needed done. So I thought it was an incredible thing to watch.
Well, the examples in the Word of leaders are Paul and the centurion. The story of the centurion. He was Jesus commended him for being a man of leadership. And James, the brother of Jesus, is listed as that. One example I didn't give, I like to do this, is to show the difference between good and how these leaderships work. Is I like to watch sports, and you would think that on a sports team that the coach is the leader of the team, but most of the time the coach is the manager of the team, but somewhere within the realms of the team is the leader of the team. And I date myself with the example of that the leader of the Baltimore Ravens when they won the Super Bowl was not the coach, but rather a man named Ray Lewis, who was the true leader and motivated that team and willed that team to win the Super Bowl that year, because he was a charismatic person. He got them fired and going. He was the heart and the soul of the team, not the man, not the coach. Coaches managed the X's and the O's, I think. But
So what was he?
he was a defensive player, a linebacker, and he got them to win the Super Bowl one year. Just willed them out to it. I think in the Twins, Kirby Puckett was a leader of the team. When they won the World Series in '87, he came into the locker room and he says, "Get on my back. We're going to do this." That's one of the famous quotes of him. He says, "Get on my back. I'll carry us." He was the leader of that team.
Wow.
That's interesting, yeah.
It is fascinating.
One of the interesting things I was listening to was about the words of the cross again. The thing that corresponds to the leader is, "It is finished." And how, as Jesus was all of these gifts, in his leading, he only did what he was called to do. So he left a lot of things undone. There were many people that weren't healed. He could only be in so many places at so many times. He didn't take over the Roman government like many thought he would. There were many things he didn't do, but he did do what the Father asked him to do.
Yes.
And so he finished his job. And that's, for the ruler to find out, what is it God is asking me to rule? Because they're always busy, they're always accomplishing, they're always...
They get overcommitted.
Yeah, they're overcommitted.
It's a weakness.
There's no question they get things done. But are they finishing what God's asked them to do? And that's the key, I think, for the ruler.
Don't you think that's the key for every
Oh, for all of us, yeah.
To let me finish what you've given me to do.
Well, and to ask, what is it that
Yes.
you are asking of me? What is the destiny you've given, the plans and
Yes.
purposes for my life, Lord? Lead me in that way. Keep me aware of that, because sometimes the different giftings, we can get off on our own good ideas or what we think, what we're comfortable in doing, and we can do it well, but it's maybe not exactly what he intended.
That's
You
right.
say the leader is, maybe it's about, this is a good idea and I can do it well and I'm going to do this, but maybe God was asking him to do something different with that same tenacity. So again, that whole adage of the good can be the enemy of God's best. We need to all, and sometimes be very careful that God's given me this gift and how can I best live it out.
And it's another kind of an independent gift too, where they have a lot of natural ability to make things happen on their own, and those people tend to not always go to God first because they're very capable in their own, in their own gifts and pulling off, anything.
And again, like I said about the giver, when they hear an amount, they give to somebody, they know, well, I heard from God. They get the leader, when a project gets completed, they know I heard from God. Because God told me to do that, and I did it. And that's what they take their satisfaction from. I completed that task, like you say.
So theirs is kind of a generational birth rate also then,
Yeah.
and something that's going to maintain and last.
They pass the legacy on to the past generations, or next generations.
Very fascinating. There was something that I read this morning that I wanted to read a couple little paragraphs out of, because it really pertains to what we've been talking about, and again, just the value and the importance of understanding these gifts are from the Father, that we were born with them, and that as we for someone that doesn't know the Lord yet, they will still function often out of those giftings because it's in them. He created them with that. But as we do get to know the Lord, we become much more aware of how we're gifted and how we can live that out with his plans and purposes. But I wanted to read this, and I know this is reading, but just if you have to close your eyes to pay attention, do so. But this is just another kind of an encouragement as to what God is saying to us. It said, when God wove us in our mother's wombs, he placed certain bents, motivations, gifts, and abilities in us. Ephesians 2:10 tells us, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. Because we don't often use the term workmanship in our culture, this translation doesn't adequately communicate to us the strength of what God is saying. It doesn't simply mean that he created us. Phomema, the Greek word used here, means a product, often referring to fabric or an outfit of clothing. This verse is using the same symbolism as Psalm 139:13, which says, God wove us in our mother's womb. We are God's clothing, designed by him, that he intends to wear. I love that. That, he wants to use us. We are his hands and his feet. He clothes us with, himself, or we are his clothing, so to speak. But it says, consistent with this symbolism, the phrase prepared beforehand in this verse comes from a sewing term meaning to measure or fit in advance. Like any good tailor before, God wove us in our mother's womb. He measured us. I love that. As our creator and destiny giver. Come on, destiny giver. He made sure our gifts, abilities, personality, and motivations would fit our purpose.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
That is.
He created us with plans and purposes. He knew us before time
Yes.
began. So he wove in us this motivational gift that was going to help us walk out our destiny and purposes and plans. I love that. He tailored us as a garment he would need to wear. He does live inside of us in order to accomplish his purposes in and through us. Oh, I just love that. God warns us in Romans 12:2 not to allow outside agents to shape or design us. He uses the term metamorphosis, the transition of a caterpillar to a butterfly, to describe our transformation. In this analogy, the worm isn't being changed from the outside in, but is morphing into what is already programmed into its DNA. Isn't that cool?
That's good.
The point couldn't be clearer. Make sure your dreams match your design. Become who you are, not who you aren't.
Wow.
Good, that's good.
Become who you are, not who you aren't. And then lastly, look deep inside and ask yourself, what dreams God hid in you? What makes you come alive? What strengths have lain dormant while you pursued goals that could never fulfill you? Make a determination now to pursue the dreams God has for you. That's why I encourage you, go deeper with these motivational gifts. As you maybe are drawn to what we taught, look up the link that we gave you and just go deeper with the Lord. Talk to him. God, you put this gift in me. This is in me from you. Reveal it in a greater way to me and show me how I can effectively walk this out with the dreams and destinies and giftings you've given me. I mean, he's so good. He's such a good God. He speaks, he reveals, he shows, as we continue to just say, your way, not mine. I give you my life for your life. He's so faithful, and you're going to begin to see things come about in your life as you step in to these giftings in a greater measure. It's amazing. It's amazing, our God. So we're going to just close with prayer. Again, I just thank you for joining us. I thank you guys. I love this. We're going to have Dave back again next week.
As a guest.
And again, if you have anything to share or give input into, testimonies, please put them in the comment, because we'd even like to share it here as part of our conversation. So Lord, we just thank you again for your faithfulness and just who you are. We thank you, Father, for these gifts that you so intentionally created us with, God. That we, each and every one of us, are created so perfectly. It says in your word, we were fearfully and wonderfully made by you, created with plans and purposes, destinies, dreams, and giftings unique to us. And I thank you for that, Lord. And I thank you that you are ever faithful to draw that out in us and bring us in to the fulfillment of that which you created us for, and the full expression of you in and through us. We celebrate that, and we trust you in that, and we give you all the glory and honor and praise. In Jesus' name. And blessings to all of you. Have a blessed week. Thank you again for joining us. And be blessed.
We might still be on.
We're going crazy.
We're still live.